So, purchasing a home isn't for everyone, and that is totally okay. You don't need anyone's permission to buy a home or not buy a home. Don't let what's happening in the market determine if it's the right time for you if you're not ready to buy. Now, before I get into the reasons of why you shouldn't buy a property in 2022, I just want to give you some context about the inspiration of this video. So, I am seeing a lot of realtors put out valuable content that I think as a consumer would find very useful if I was at the stage of learning about the market. Now, obviously, it's the internet, so fact checked everything. But before I got into this industry, I actually had no idea what I was getting into in regards to how the general public actually views realtors. And so I quickly learned that a lot of people hate us, and for good reason, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Just like many industries, there's always a group of people who ruin it for the rest of us. There's always going to be bad apples who spoil it for everybody and everything we do in life, really. I have been fortunate enough to know some great people who are passionate about sharing their knowledge about the market and actually helping you make sense of it. That's why we do what we do on platforms like YouTube, right? We take the time to put together videos like this one and content to help you decipher if maybe right now is a good time for you to buy, or maybe you should actually wait a little bit and maybe you'll realize that you should hold off on selling right now. And I have a colleague, a friend of mine, who speaks for the media often about the market. And in the comments section, I noticed that the comments were all kind of surrounded around the same thing. The market's going to crash. We're all screwed. The end of the world is near. You shouldn't buy real estate. Of course, this agent is telling you to buy real estate and all they want to do is get paid and whatever else negative thing that they could think of. What I always see in the comments section in every real estate related article or video, that's along the lines of the narrative that's being put out there. And so it got me thinking, if you've been contemplating about making a move this year, there's a few reasons that you probably should not make a move this year. One of them being if you have a short-term outlook on the market or if you're planning on making a move in the near future, right? Real estate market is always moving, no pun intended, but it will always ebb and flow. It'll always go up and down in terms of values and activity. But right now, as interest rates rise, home values are coming down. So if you are buying a property with a short-term outlook or you plan to move in the near future, you may find your home be worth less than what you bought it for, which obviously can put you at risk. However, if you do plan on keeping that property for at least 5, if not 10 years or longer, you will outpace any sort of volatility or uncertainty in the marketplace. And historically speaking, home values double on average every 10 years. For example, the average price in the GTA 10 years ago was $523,000, and now the average price 10 years later, even with the correction in 2017 and what we're going through now, is just under $1.1 million. So I just want to bring your attention to this graph right here. As you can see very clearly that time in the market will outweigh any dips and blips that is going on with pricing and activity, etc. Now, this is public knowledge. This can be found on the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board website. Just go to trreb.ca and all the data, all the information can be found on there if you want to take a closer look. But as the famous saying goes, it's not about timing the market, it's about your time in the market. So for instance, let's say that you bought it 2017, which is this peak right here at the very peak, and then summer rolled around and you could see how it has corrected. You are likely cursing each time that you made that mortgage payment. But 2017 was not that long ago, and look at what has happened since then. Now, this peak is obviously higher than the last peak, and in 2008, when the states were experiencing their housing challenges on a seasonal basis, it did have an impact on us here, but you can see that from this graph on an annual basis, prices just sort of flatlined. In fact, since the 1980s, even with all that has happened, even taking into consideration the run-up that we've seen in the late 80s and the crash that we've seen in the early 90s, the real estate market has, on average, increased in price 7% per year. Now, home prices in the GTA are 14% higher year to date when comparing it to the same 9 months of last year. Even with all the interest rates, obviously some pockets and cities are going to perform differently, but the GTA as a whole has cost $171,000 more. Now, mind you, we did have an exceptional January and February, so just take that into consideration. But we can try and time the market all we want, and some will get lucky, but the majority of us will get it wrong because there's so much outside factors to consider outside of supply and demand and interest rates that have an impact on price, right? Something to keep in mind is, who predicted a global pandemic, who predicted a war, who predicted all this crazy inflation, who predicted the immigration levels and what they're going to be reached and these crazy big numbers, right? Canada will grow by about 400,000 new neighbors each year over the next 3 years. And that's further going to have an impact on our already tight supply for housing for sale and new construction. Also, keep in mind that people need a place to live. It's as simple as that. When demand moves from the buying side, it has to go somewhere. And where's that? The rental side. Everybody needs a roof over their head. Rents have increased 20% year over year, and it's getting to a point that now people are considering to buy again because it doesn't make sense for them to continue to rent. I don't want to make this video about making anyone feel bad about not buying a property. That's not my intention. My intention is to show you stuff like this, to put it into perspective and to see both sides of the coin, because renting may make sense for you, and that's totally awesome. There's absolutely nothing wrong with renting where you live. I also want to add that data can be packaged in a way to fit whatever narrative that you want to fit. So if you're considering making a move, if you're a first-time home buyer or you're looking to sell and buy, then ask every question possible that you can think of and work with someone that's going to show you graphs like this and show you the good and bad and what's actually going on. So with the exception of the late 80s and early 90s, any downturns in the market have been short-lived. During times when prices are dropping, they don't really keep dropping for years and years. It's usually a shortened period of time before they flatline or trade sideways for a couple of years, meaning they don't really go up or go down. Then something happens and everyone gets really excited about real estate again, and we see lots of demand return back to the marketplace and prices go hot again before the cycle happens once again. But with every cycle, it creates a new threshold and a higher point on the chart. Secondly, don't buy a home if you're not sure how much you can afford, meaning don't overextend yourself. Knowing how much the bank will lend you for a mortgage is one thing, but there's way more to consider than just a monthly mortgage, like property tax, utility costs, maintenance costs. There's so much, right? Factor in even things like grocery bills, gas, clothing. I mean, we've seen how much the cost of basically everything has gone up over the last 18 to 24 months. Your mortgage pre-approval doesn't take those things into consideration, so you need to be comfortable with that payment. Now, owning a home doesn't mean you have to become house poor. A common thing I hear is that housing is so expensive, and don't get me wrong, it totally is, but so is renting. Rental prices have increased 20% year over year, and each has its own pros and cons, but when looking at long term, the pros of owning a home outweigh the pros of renting if you have a long-term perspective and plan on staying in the market. But if you can look at your monthly spending and maybe cut out trips to the mall every week or reduce the amount of times you're ordering Uber Eats and still enjoy your life while putting a roof over your head, then maybe homeownership is something that you should consider. Like, don't get me wrong, right? I wholeheartedly believe that we have one life and that we should enjoy to the fullest and we should do what makes us happy. But if it means small-term pain for long-term gain, then doesn't that make more sense? Because think of it this way, we all need a place to live, whether that means you're renting or you own your home. The difference between the two is that renting means that you're paying 100% interest to the landlord. Your money isn't growing, while owning a home, yes, it can be expensive and it's tough to save for the initial down payment. I totally get it, but if you can do it, then you're leveraging your money. The bank is loaning you the rest at a lower interest rate of, let's say, 5%, while over the long term, your investment is growing. Now, last but not least, don't get caught up in all this hype and hysteria. If you're buying or not buying real estate because someone in the comment section of the news article is telling you that you'd be a fool if you got into that property while interest rates are rising, that's kind of a terrible approach. Now, if someone is giving you only one side of the equation, that whether that's a family member or even a realtor, the news, social media, then I'd consider where I'm getting my information from, and I'd make sure that I'm asking the right questions that challenge the information that's actually being said. Because just like many things in life, there's pros and cons to everything. And if it makes sense to you and you're able to get into that market and want to buy a home but are afraid of interest rates, which again, I totally understand, there's a lot of uncertainty of how this is all going to play out. And that's why it's so important to crunch the numbers. When new clients come to me and are kind of on the fence of what to do, we run through different scenarios with them, meaning, here's what it costs for a home and all the expenses that come with it at this interest rate. Then here is what it costs if interest rates were to go to X number. And then that question really becomes, would you be comfortable to sustain your life while putting this roof over your head? So when applying for a mortgage, lenders will actually use what's called a stress test. So they've already kind of built this scenario into your qualifying process, and you will need to prove that you can afford the payments at that qualifying interest rate, which is typically 2% higher than the actual rate in your mortgage contract. Consider what owning real estate can actually do for you long term. Getting into a property now at a lower price point at a higher rate is actually better than buying a higher price with a lower rate, because your down payment is going to be less for essentially the same home. Your land transfer tax will be less because it's based on a sliding scale, and you can refinance when rates adjust at a lower balance. So remember that the market is cyclical. It's always going to go up and down, and there's always going to be somebody in the comment section complaining it is too expensive and hoping for it to all come burning down because they're upset they didn't have a plan. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here with all of this is figure out what your long-term goals are and do your research. Maybe your goal is not to be a homeowner, and that's totally cool. Then don't buy a home in 2022. That is it for now, guys. My name is Alice Prince. Ciao for now, and I will catch you on the next one.